question waiting.
Sorry, Nancy, I forgot to hit record earlier.
Okay. So power is paraphrase, open question, wait, empathize, and reframe. And then you also know that a paraphrase sounds like this, and an open question sounds like this. And waiting is really important if you're going to honor people's ability and capacity to answer questions. And that empathy is important. That especially in that anger, the arousal cycle that Paula was just going through, that's really important, that you can empathize with people. It's one of the things that will bring them back down. And then the reframe. So power is now become a neural address for all of that information. So that's why we go through that. Power, heart, ghost, all of those are the things you put in your pocket and keep with you when you're mediating, to pull out and to use in the event that things go a little sideways. And today we're going to just add a couple more to that. When I think about all of this, and I want to use the metaphor of going on a journey, right? So for conflict is the wilderness, and we're getting prepared to go on this wonderful journey into the unknown. In the old days, if you saw a map and it was unknown, they said, here be dragons. And so we're going into the dragons, and we're going to see what happens during this adventure. We are the guides on the side of this adventure, and our job is to keep people safe, right? And so if I look at the acronym GHOST, I think of that as my cell phone, or my way to communicate verbally with the outside world. So, and I'm asking people to be gentle and honest and open and specific, and to keep talking. So that communication piece is really important. And for me, that's when you frame it in the GHOST acronym, the GHOST protocol, that allows people to have that ability to access each other and the guide, and speak and listen to each other in a way that'll allow them to reach their goal, the end of the journey. When I think about heart, hush, empathize, attend, reflect, and trust, I'm more thinking about it as a temperature guide, a thermometer, if you like. What is this like? Like, where are we now in this? And how can we, do we need to act or not? Because we're listening with heart. So we're hushing our own stories. Paul was talking a lot about stories. We do fill in a lot of gaps, right? Because there's data and then there's what we do with it. So if you can hush your own story, you can empathize with the other person, you can attend to what's really going on, what both parties are saying and what they're not saying. You can reflect back what you're hearing and what you're sensing, and I'm sensing is a better word, and you're trusting that everyone's doing the best they can with what they know, and you've got that heart piece going, then it's easier for you to determine what is the temperature of this conversation, right? You might have with you a flashlight, and the flashlight to me is the power tool. Paraphrase, open question, wait, empathize, and reframe, because it will focus on what needs to be addressed. Because something will come up, it will need paraphrasing because they've said it 3 times, and you'll know that that's where we're going to go. And that's what we're going to look at more closely with the flashlight. But today we're going to talk about the protective gear that you have to take. So you've put in your destination into your Apple Watch or whatever watch you're wearing, and it's telling you what kind of equipment you need. And so it does mention that, you should probably take a compass so you know where you're going. And you will probably need some form of communication, walkie-talkie, cell phone, something. You'll need something as a temperature gauge. And most phones have that available, a weather gauge on your phone or weather app. A flashlight you have on your phone. And now it's telling you here are the protective pieces that you need as you go into this unknown place, right? And we're going to get into that in just a minute, because the protective gear that we need will depend on the journey that you're going on, right? For most people, take protective gear with them and just bring it back with them, and they never really have to use it. And that's kind of like what these next 5 skills are like. They are for your use in the event that the weather changes, that there is some sort of need to focus on something, suddenly you're in the dark, you need your flashlight, all those kinds of things. But you don't know going in which ones you're going to use. And I know that I find, and I'm sure Paula will attest to this, that you don't have to use them very often. Most people, if you've prepared them well in a pre-meeting and you know what's going to happen, pretty much you can tell by having spoken to both of them separately, then it's pretty straightforward where that big aha moment's going to be, what they're going to learn from the other party when they say, oh, I didn't know that. And they go into that recovery stage. That arousal is done. Everybody's happy, not happy, but at least satisfied. And they're moving towards resolution. And all of that happens pretty quickly. I did a mediation somewhere else in the world, not here, over Zoom last week. And it was classic. And I always love it when a mediation is classic. You know, we did all the prep. We met with both parties. I met with the first party, and I had a mediator in training with me, but the mediator in training was listening and watching. And afterwards she says, they did and said exactly what you said they would. I said, yeah, that's what happens, because they're human beings. And we know what human beings can be like. And we understand how the neuroscience of all of this already, right? We know what words will impact what pieces of the conversation, because our job really is just to manage the conversation, to make sure people are using words that make sense to everybody, words that are going to lead them to common ground and a solution that will work for everyone, a sustainable solution. So really we become the wayfinders in that. And the way, if it's a common path that you've walked down before, as Paula and I have done many, 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 many times, then you know your way and you can see where there's been a change or a little detour, and you can maneuver through all of that and get to a place where you know that there will be a resolution. A lot of it is in the setup. And if you set it up well, then often you're not going to find yourself needing these next 5 pieces. So we are in charge of, if you like, our client is the relationship between the people and the conversation they're having that is building that relationship. It's not either one of those people. It is the space between them. That's the unknown. That's where the journey is, into that space, okay? We do that from what I call a mediator stance. All of the things that Paul was saying about that arousal cycle are so true and so important to know as a mediator where your arousal points are. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, or Paula will in a minute. But it really is that we have to start from a place of appreciation and understanding that we trust these people to be able to resolve their own differences. Okay, so that's the first stance. We also know that words create worlds. And so as long as they're talking past, present, and future, and they're talking the same tense at the same time, they can move towards something. If the words start to get out of hand, if there's something that's not adding to the solution, then there may be an opportunity for us to intervene. The thing is to remember too that as a mediator, whatever you do or say makes a difference. Whatever you do or say makes a difference. So being deliberate and very in the moment is super important, because your job really is to make sure that they feel safe, that they have choices and they can see what those choices are, and that they're just to notice and honor them in the moment, okay? So that they can dream a future together that will work for both of them. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about this. Part of it is being positive. I mean, mediators are always the nicest people you'll ever want to meet because they're very positive and they go into situations that other people wouldn't go into and say, okay, we know what to do here. Let's go this way. And they take the people by the hand, both of them, and they move them towards that resolution. And even when you don't believe it can happen, which was what was going on last week, we found resolution, and we found it twice because one of the defendant, I guess you would call him, he said, I didn't know that, twice. So we were able to come to resolution. And as soon as he said it, of course, you know that things are going to be okay. So positive thinking is the way of the mediator. This Time Magazine edition just came out. I'm going to suggest that you have a look at it. Talks a lot about the brain science behind it and the behavior behind it, and really looking at how important it is to have that mindset. And they call it by the numbers because every once in a while they give you a statistic, which is kind of cool. Let me see if I can find one statistic for you. 80% of the human population is inherently optimistic. Some just don't know it. Okay. They want to believe. So we're going to work with that, right? And we're going to say, okay, most people don't want to fight. They really do want a resolution. They don't want to give in or give up. But that fight, flight, or freeze place is really uncomfortable. And so what if you can give them a path towards that going away, they will be very happy people. Okay. So let's talk about each of these. And we've kind of set aside about, what, 20 minutes, Paula, for each one? Can't hear you.
Yes.
Okay. So you're watching the clock for me, I hope.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions so far? Mnemonic devices. Thanks, Reese. That's what they're called. And I never like the word acronym. To me, it's not the word, but it's the common word that people use is acronym. Any questions so far? You know what I'm talking about? There's that stance that you have that this can be resolved, and you hold that hope for them the whole way through, right? Because you're on this journey, you're keeping them safe, you're heading them in this direction. You're the guide, okay? So let's look at the skills. Is you got that document that Paula sent you? Talked about the protective gear and the whole stance of the mediator. And now we're going to go into these 5 different pieces. So just know that in the first book that I read, and I think Paula read it too, by Cheryl Picard, there were 128 skills on one page for mediators, skills for mediators. That's too many to remember. So we kind of boiled it down to 20, right? The ones in Ghost, the ones in Heart, the ones in Power, and these ones. These ones are, it's just CNIBT, and I've tried to move the letters around to make it mean something, and it can't. Well, I can, but it's not rude. It's rude. So we're not going to do that. So let's look at the first one. The first one is confronting. And for confrontation, and what I'd like to do as we go through all 5 of them is to answer the 5 whys and the how. Okay, so who, what, where, when, why, and how for each of these. So you know exactly where you might be able to use them. Okay. Confrontation, I'm going to call the sunglasses. Okay, and your protective gear. Because they are the ones that allow you to deal with the glaring things that pop up that you can't ignore. Okay, so what we tend to do then is that we have to look at it, but we have to look at it through some sort of lens to protect our eyes, because somebody has done something that is way off base, way out of line. It's not something that you can ignore. And so you have to confront them, especially we use confrontation when the thing they said this time earlier and the thing they're saying now don't match. Okay. So you kind of catch them in a bit of a lie or a bit of an exaggeration, or something's happened that's different. So that's kind of the when. Confrontation, you need to use gentle, honest, open, specific talk when you're doing confrontation, right? And part of what Paula was saying about fear and anger being related really helps here, because what you want to do is you want to look at this person, you want to confront them and not let them get away with stuff, because it's not helping the relationship or the conversation, which are your two main purposes to get them through this conversation. And you mention it to them. Sometimes it sounds like, I'm confused. Earlier you said this and now you're saying that. There's no question. That's not part of it. The confronting is showing them, like holding up a mirror and saying, this is what you've done and said. I'm confused, right? And you do it when, the when part is when you're confused, because likely the other party's confused as well. Okay, that's a possibility. You can also do it when something that they did earlier doesn't match what they're doing now. So it could be a shift in body language. It could be the language that they're using has shifted its tone. There could be any kind of thing like that, but you can see that it's leading away. For example, in the mediation I did last week, we kind of set out at the beginning what the agenda was. It's what everybody does, right? We're going to talk about getting you some housing. That was the topic. We're going to get housing, right? So this guy was petitioning to get funding to build something, and he had been denied that, and so he had been brought to mediation. So we focused it on, we're here today to find a way to get you the housing you need, right? Which was different than what he had sent documents about, which was why the rules should apply to him, rather than finding him some housing, right? Because the rules can't change, and we can't change the rules. So within the framework of what the rules in the protocol are, what is negotiable? And when I met with the parties separately, I thought at first, okay, there's nothing here that's negotiable, so why are we doing this? When I met with the first party, that's what I thought. When I met with the second party, I went, oh, okay, there's room. And so at the end, almost at the end of the mediation, our defendant starts bringing up the documents that he sent and saying how unfair the rules are, and this has to happen, and it doesn't make any sense. And so I gently confronted him. Said, well, I'm confused. We agreed that the agenda was about how to get you some housing. How are we doing on that agenda? He said, well, we're doing good. I've got some good ideas. I said, okay. Said, so that's other thing is not something that we can do. So it's that kind of, you agreed to the agenda, but now you're pulling us away from it. That's a confrontation piece, right? One's goals and the behavior used to achieve them are different. You want to be friends, you want to make this work, and yet you're swearing at that person. So help me understand that. And I've been in those situations too, where, and sometimes you do it in a caucus. Sometimes you do it after the mediation is, at least that round of mediation is finished. And you say to somebody who's saying, I really want this to work, and I really want to get this resolved, and I want to move back into my workplace. And then you say to them, so if that's truly what you want to do, why were you swearing at everybody in the meeting? That's confronting, right? Because you confront when it's in the way of the resolution. Okay. All right. Here too, there's the use of iMessages. Are you guys familiar with iMessages? Just do this if you are. Yeah, some of you are, okay. iMessages work really well to confront. Because you can say, I noticed that your behavior isn't really matching what because I'm not going to say what the behavior is, but your behavior is not really giving me any indication that you really want to resolve this, right? So, and then you say, I'm confused, right? That's my favorite line. I mean, I know not you guys are probably not old enough to remember Columbo, but he was a really good detective. He used to do that all the time. I'm confused. He'd touch his head like that, right? And that's what you have to do in mediation too. If you're confused, say so, right? Use the iMessage though. Don't put it on either one of them because then you'll lose your balance. But you can say, I'm confused and I thought we were going to do this, right? And so iMessages can sound different. I mean, the whole point of an iMessage though is to take the heat off the parties and put it onto the mediator so that they can readjust and regroup. And if you're doing the map thing on your Google Maps, it's going recalculating. So that's what you're doing. You're recalculating your way to common ground, right? So the that's the first skill, confronting. Questions?
Can I ask?
Sarah?
How do people generally respond when you do that?
Can I talk about my guy from last week?
Sure, yeah, thanks.
Because it was kind of classic. Because I said, I'm confused. We're here to talk about the housing thing. How are we doing with that? And he said, well, we're doing pretty good. It just really is annoying that this and this and this and that. And I'm saying, okay, so what can we do about it here? And he said, well, nothing. I said, so what other things could you do to get these things changed? What could you talk to somebody in government or could you do that kind of thing? So we just briefly explored it and then pulled him back in. And so in most cases, remember, the neurobiology behind this, right? If they're in the arousal state, then they need to have some time to calm down and to do other things. So I use distraction and talk about something else, give them some time to pull themselves back down. But like Paula was saying, you just keep the language and you keep the subject really simple. What we know about people in conflict is they're all about 6 years old. Okay, when they're in that arousal cycle, there's not a whole lot of language that can really land for them. So we're going to keep it simple and we're going to keep it off topic a little bit just to move them back so they can get their breath in. There's more blood in their brain and they're not feeling that anxiety. So yeah.